Hello, this is the Net Hero podcast. I'm Sumit Bose, and this podcast is all about business and doing better for the planet. It's not an eco podcast, we're not green warriors. We believe that business is good and business will make the difference, but it's about holding businesses to account. So if you're interested in what we're doing to try and make things better, to stop our polluting of the planet, to stop our global warming, to stop us driving around in cars that are polluting the air that we breathe, this is the podcast for you. It's all about business, it's about invention, it's about entrepreneurs, scientists, and frankly, there's a few wild cards as well. Do hope you enjoy listening to this episode, and make sure you subscribe and follow us on your social media platforms, and please check out our two news websites, energylivenews.com and Future Net Zero. On with the show. Is the grid the blocker? Now, you've heard many tall tales about where we're going to be in 2050. It's all going to be amazing. The reality of the last probably 4 or 5 years is we've seen what's happened. We have moved the needle a lot, particularly in terms of, generation globally, but particularly in the UK and Europe. But we've seen the take-up of low carbon sometimes being held back by the grid. If you've been reading news on Energy Live News or Future Net Zero, you've seen we've done lots of stories about people talking about the grid capacity, how can it work? And they're doing things that you could call, demand side response. People call it flexibility. But basically, using the system, which is at present pretty old, and designed for one thing, big power stations sending power to you and me, to use new technologies to try and balance that by taking demand on and off. Now, some say that this is a difficult one because the technology has to match with very, very old school analog technology. Others say, do people want to do it? Because it's very difficult to get a business to say, hey, switch it off in this kind of time because we'll pay you. Well, one company is trying to use AI and lots of smart thinking to see if actually you don't have to do the flexibility as much as you think, because there might be more capacity on the actual power lines themselves. So I'm delighted to say, joining me from Yeehaw, Austin, Texas. I had to do that. I'm really sorry, man. I've got George Rutter, who is the CEO of a company called Grid Raven. And George, you're originally from Latvia, correct?
Estonia,
sorry, from Estonia. So how are you finding Texas?
Actually, I love Texas. The biggest surprise is how friendly everybody is and how happy that people are. So it will probably have a reverse culture shock.
And how big the burgers are.
And the burritos, everything's huge, yeah. And the cars and the houses, that's all true. But my main emotion is just how happy and content people are. And so it's been a very easy change going from Estonia to Texas.
But you've had the weather though, haven't you, lately? So we'll talk about that in a second. You started off doing your own sort of startup, then you worked for the Estonian sort of national grid. Now, I don't think I know much about Estonia. Calling it Latvia for a start didn't help. But anyway, I don't really know much about Estonia, and I don't think a lot of our viewers and listeners would. What sort of grid system have you got? What sort of power system is it? Is it very much still using big baseload power from, coal or gas, or does it have some nuclear? And explain, why you got into that side of it, because it's quite interesting if you have a startup and then you sort of go back to learn about the grid. I wanted to know why you did that.
Sure. Estonia actually has had historically a very special power system. Well, first of all, it is very small, so I forgive you for not knowing it. It's most people I meet, I'm the first Estonian they've met.
Sure, actually.
Yeah. But it used to have a power system based on oil shale, which is a type of coal that's even worse than coal in terms of emissions. It has a lower energy density, it causes like almost twice as emissions. But so Estonia had, I think, the world's 10th highest per capita carbon emissions in 2010 or something.
Wow.
But now those plants were, most of them just have become so old. These are like Soviet age plants. Estonia was occupied by the Soviet Union for 50 years. So those plants have now been mostly shut down and replaced by a lot of imported power, but also lots of wind, lots of solar. We're building new gas plants now. So the Estonian energy system has gone through quite a rapid transformation in the last 15 years. But I've spent actually 15 years living in various parts of Europe and now in the US. So the inspiration for Grid Raven has come more from a global point of view, having spent time and talked with solar and wind developers around the world, the challenges that Estonia has faced are really the same challenges that almost every country in the world is facing. That we are moving from centralized thermal generation to variable generation. And in parts of the world now, also the increase in power consumption is sort of come as a surprise. So I've been in the power industry long enough to remember that only a few years ago, the main problem that people were talking about was that there is not enough growth in electricity. Like even in the 2010s across Europe, the worry was that nobody's building new power plants because they're getting old and power prices are so low that we're going to end up in having reliability issues because of a lack of investment. So that climate, that has changed. So the whole power industry has done almost an 180-degree turn in terms of what people's worries and concerns are. Now the concern is, are we able to meet a load growth? Can we build fast enough?
Yes. I said at the beginning, I mean, we talk about, and I'm going to get into the whole flexibility thing, but I get it. You haven't been in Estonia for a while, but it's a very interesting part of the world, that whole kind of, the Baltic states, you've got the sea. And you said, very much it was old Soviet ways of sort of powering, very fossil fuel based. Have they developed a lot of, is it offshore wind, onshore wind? Are they using hydro? You talked about solar. I mean, I think you're pretty warm in the summer, but I don't think your winters are great over there. So what is the government there, and particularly not just in Estonia, but moving through the other Baltics, are they moving more towards using the renewables from wind, or are they using a mix of solar and, as you said, gas? I don't know if they use any nuclear.
There's a lot of debate on that topic, so I've been quite active in the debate also, and how the government should and how Estonia should power itself. The government does have a very high, I think it's even 100% renewable target for electricity, so it's really going along that route very quickly. And in 2018, I was working in the national grid of Estonia, and you can imagine it's a company that really knows the electricity system through and through, and most people there will have been working in the transmission sector for 30 years. Like they know the industry. And in 2017, I think, or around that time, the Estonian government gave quite generous subsidies for solar. And you're right, Estonia is as far north as Alaska in terms of...
I was going to say...
Like, cold and dark, except I think the statistic is something like 90% of sunshine falls in the 3 summer months.
In the 3 summer months, yeah. Where you get a long lot of sun, 9 days, don't you? Yeah, of course.
Yeah, the sun barely sets in summer, right?
Yeah.
And in 1 or 2 years, so many solar panels were installed that the summertime daytime load was met by solar PV. So that happened within the space of 2 years.
Wow.
And what it meant from the grid operator side is they have to make sure that the grid is safely operated. So, and fundamental to that is modeling how power is flowing, how much power is going through any specific line, to make sure that safety limits are maintained. And to do that, you need to know where power is generated and where it's consumed. And within 1 or 2 years, suddenly the grid operator had lost visibility into what's actually happening. Sure, they can measure, but they couldn't predict as accurately because they didn't know where the solar panels are as well. Like that data connections hadn't been done. So that shock changed the way the people thought. People have been working there for 30 years, and nobody really took solar seriously, or wind. It was always seen as an alternative or minuscule. Sure, it'll like grow a little bit, but it grew so fast that took everybody by surprise. And the Baltics, not only Estonia, have really doubled down on that route. And the debate now is how do we, essentially from an electricity point of view, as an island, because we have Russia on one side, the sea on the other, and there's like one overhead line connecting to Poland, and we have many undersea cables. The debate has always been, how do we make sure that on a cold winter, like Dunkelflaute, when there's no sun and no wind, how do we power the country? My ex-boss, I used to work in transmission, and the CEO was very much of the position that we can rely on our neighbors. So the undersea cables, Finland, Sweden.
Interconnectors,
When we lack power, we'll get it from the neighbors to summit. Like, it wasn't like a blue-eyed thought, but at least the company accounted for the interconnectors to be there when we need them. And that's been sort of like with Russian ships dragging anchors along the seaboard. They damaged one of these cables. I think last year.
Yes,
It took 4 or 5 months to fix that, because you have to send ships out. You have to do a lot of work to fix those cables. It's not trivial. So for about half a year or so, the power price in Estonia was really high because our main import cable was broken. And so the debate of how does a relatively small electrical system power itself and keep the lights on is a microcosm, a little example of the whole debate happening around the world.
It's a brilliant example. Yeah, I mean, it's the same problem we've got here in the UK, and you can see it all over. Because you said something very interesting. Because the people voted, right? The people bought solar, and this is the issue that we've got. And we're going to talk about what you're doing with GridRaven in a moment, but people are changing, and not maybe as fast, but businesses certainly are. And so, before we talk about what you've done with GridRaven, explain what the big problem is for all of these grids around the world, the grid operators, because the system is about 100 years old, more than that. It was big power made generally with fossil fuels going down big transmission lines. Everyone knows what it is. The grid sits there and goes, oh, they're all going to watch TV today. They're going to watch Estonia win the World Cup. There you go. Let's put some more power in. And it was all nice and easy. And it was all one direction. Since we've had this global change to renewables, and we've had, on-site generation and all of this, what do you think is the problem facing that you saw in Estonia, that problem will be facing grids of nations all around the world? Because this system is still very much a top-down system, isn't it?
Yeah, the top-down aspect is one, and the other aspect is that now when we are building solar and wind, they are not in the same place as those thermal power plants. They're somewhere else.
Yeah.
Typically, thermal power plants would have been built relatively nearby or close to the city so that the transmission grid doesn't cross the entire country. The best places for solar and wind, typically like the windy deserts, they don't have any transmission lines in them.
Yep.
So that's one of the issues. And again, Estonia is a great example because essentially the coal mines are in the east of the country, but the best wind is in the west of the country. So suddenly the weight of the transmission grid has to shift. And there are massive investments undertaken in Estonia, just like in the UK, across the world. Grid operators are investing billions and billions into building new lines. And the issue there is that it just takes a very long time to do so. There's a famous power line in northern Germany, which I think it was in permitting for 15 years, and it was built within 3 years. It's the time that it takes to build the grid. That is really the core issue here. We can build solar and wind and even gas, coal plants, whatever we want to build, we can build those faster, except for nuclear. We can build fast.
Of course.
But the grid, we can't build fast enough. And when we also are going to go to a renewables-based system, like in Europe, it makes sense for security reasons and for economic reasons to do.
Of course.
Then we also need we need more capacity on the grid. You could, in the past, operate a coal or nuclear plant, maybe 80% of the capacity factor. But with solar and wind, you're down to maybe 30, 40, maybe even less. And so you need essentially twice the capacity on the grid for the same amount of power. Unless if you do slightly clever things like demand response or account with grid optimization, then you're going to have to build a much stronger grid. And actually, I'll rephrase that. We have to build a much stronger grid anyway, but maybe we don't need to build quite as much if we do the optimization tools.
So GridRaven, we're going to explain what that is to everyone now. But, what I said right at the beginning is the challenge, and you've just beautifully sort of summarized it. And everyone's facing this challenge, right? So as more people get electric cars, then the demand goes up and people go, oh, do we need to dig up more road and put new lines in? As you said, coal seams were in one part of the nation, same in the UK. Wind is in another part. So, are we going to have to dig up? Now, we've seen flexibility. I gave a very ham-fisted example of what it is. But in essence, it's saying to people, hey, if you've got a bit and you don't need to use it, don't turn it on. And we can see most people know what demand-side response is. Now, what you've done is very clever, because can you explain the issue with the power lines that you are trying to solve with what you're doing with GridRaven? Because before we recorded, I had no idea, because I just think, power lines, they're a cable. So give us a little expert's guide to what power lines are and what you are doing to get more capacity from them.
Yeah, absolutely. I quite often love hearing about problems that I never knew existed that are so important to how we live. It happens sometimes. This is one of them. And like 5 years ago, if you worked in a transmission, like a national grid, maybe 1 in 20 people would have even known what line ratings are and how they're calculated. Now many people do. and also more generally. But the UK actually has a very clear example of that. So you mentioned this, a coal used to be, I believe, in like Wales and that part of the country. Wind is in Scotland, and
Correct,
the transmission grid from Scotland to England is not built for that.
No.
And so I think in the UK last year there was 1.3 billion pounds worth of congestion, and what that means is that the wind turbines are able to spin, but and there's consumption in England that would like to get that power, but the grid cannot handle it. So the lines, they physically, if you allowed that to happen, the lines, the transmission lines, the massive power lines crossing the country would get too hot. Like there would be 1 or 2 lines that would just overheat, maybe 3 or 4. They would overheat. They would like come too close to the ground, and they would cause they would get damaged, and you would have to shut them down, and massive problems would occur. So what the grid operator does is that they pay gas plants in England to turn on instead, and then they pay the wind turbines to turn off.
I know.
So
curtailment, they call it, don't they?
Curtailment, yeah.
Which is awful. The amount of money we're blowing on that.
And that's a global problem. That's not just the UK, it's a problem everywhere. And curtailment increases when you increase the share of renewables. And the only fix to that really is building a stronger grid, but that takes 10 years or more. So what we are doing is we're helping grid operators account with the actual physical situation of the grid. So it turns out that a transmission line, like the ability of a transmission line to carry energy varies by like 2x over the course of a few days. And the fundamental physics is that because it's limited by overheating, if there's a bit of wind, then it cools down the wires. So it's like the same like blowing on your hot coffee, right?
Right.
And because wind forecasts have not been accurate enough, the grid operator has to account as if there's no wind at all times. And then they calculate the ability of the lines to carry energy, assuming no wind. So they get a lower number almost all the time than the grid can actually handle. And we fixed that. So we have an AI-based wind forecast that is giving you a wind forecast with 99% certainty. So we tell them, like, with 99% certainty, tomorrow at 3 p.m., this line can handle twice as much power. So you don't have to curtail. You can allow the Scottish wind to England.
Now that is incredible. So give us the physics of it. I don't even know what they're made of, right? Are they made of steel? I have no idea what, you see them all the time. I've seen them since I was a child. I have no idea what they're made of. So, but you're saying what limits them is, say you're generating, right? The wind turbine is generating. There's some sort of big kind of power plant whacking the energy down, right? And it goes down there. Obviously, people know that electricity goes in waves. Is there a sort of limit of how many waves you can get in? And is that when it starts to lose the transmission and wastes a lot of energy and heat? And
it's actually simpler. It's simpler than that. We all know that if you use your like laptop or phone, it overheats, it gets hot, right? The same thing happens with those wires. If electricity goes through, it's called resistive heating. It's just the current flowing through the wire heats it up, and it's aluminum or steel reinforced aluminum wires around it. Just the metal gets hot, and if you run it to like 100 degrees C, then it has a certain strength. If you put it to 110, then it starts to become softer, and it might deform and just like get too close to the ground and become damaged.
Oh wow! So the cables can weigh down.
Yeah, they come too close to the ground, and that's a safety issue. But also, if you get them too hot, then it might not go back up again. So you have to replace it.
Wow!
And so those are the fundamental problems, and that doesn't happen. Like, and one example I like to bring is that if there's a snowstorm on a highway, then you can't go at your usual 60 miles per hour. You have to slow down to 30, right? That's a speed limit that's set for the worst weather, and we're operating the transmission grid as if it was the worst weather all year round. We're limiting the speed or like the amount of power that can flow through the network based on a hot summer day with no wind, but it's almost never.
And that's because we don't have enough data. That's what it is. We've made the assumption, which is the fair assumption, the worst case scenario.
And again, going back like 40 years ago, you built a transmission line to bring the power from a power plant to the city. You made sure that line can handle the worst case. Of course you did, because you want to be available 24/7. So now we need that extra capacity to bring power from other places.
So you're using smart AI and some sort of interface. So you can predict, okay, the wind does the cooling, right? You said. So the wind cools it, and you can say, actually, that power line is not at 100 degrees, it's at 90, right? So it can actually handle more because you're assuming it's at 110, right? Have you got any stats? And I don't want you to be specific, but have you been able to show how much extra capacity your program can give the grid operators? Is it 5%, 10%?
Yeah. So we're live already in two countries, and
Yeah.
so we have operational data there, and we've seen over the course of a year it was 22% in the case of Estonia that it's
Wow.
more capacity from this. Now that's not available all the time,
Okay.
and also
Yeah.
there are other like the limitations across the country are not always the overhead lines. They also have substation like transformers that can take a certain amount of
course.
power and so on. So it helps like accounting for the wind cooling on transmission lines maybe helps reduce half of congestion, and within that half you're reducing congestion half the time, but even that quarter of congestion is significant, is massive. And yeah,
That's still a lot, though. Yeah, it's a lot of saving. Yeah.
yeah.
And so, will this saving, for the grid operator, that does two things from what you're saying. We could, in the case of the UK, get more of that green wind energy to us. And also, would it mean that they don't have to necessarily, although they will, have to reinforce or build new power lines to take bigger capacity? Is that what you're trying to do?
Yeah, in theory, but because this wind cooling effect is there roughly half the time or so,
Yes.
then you do need to build more
So we still
lines
need to build.
yeah.
Right. Okay.
It correlates well with wind turbines generation, but like with solar, it's not always windy when it's sunny. So you do want
Yeah.
to build the grid. It just allows us to buy time, maybe accelerate by a few years. And also this debate about there's a bit into the incentives of the utility. So there in the UK you have the National Energy System Operator,
Yes.
NESO,
Yeah.
NESO, and then you have National Grid, which owns the assets. And the way that National Grid pays dividends and earns money is by building the grid, and they get a regulated rate of return. NESO, on the other hand, doesn't set the ratings. They don't own the assets, but they pay the curtailment cost and congestion cost. So there's a bit of a misalignment in incentives. On the one hand,
Of
you have a
course.
utility that owns the wires and wants
Yep.
to avoid all risk,
Yep.
and also wants to build as much as you can, who doesn't actually, like fundamentally on their balance sheet, they don't care about the cost of electricity. They care about reliability. Of course, they care because they're all people, and they care about price of electricity in that sense, but not on the balance sheet. And then
No, I understood.
on the balance sheet and NESO, they don't have the ability to then optimize, and so there's a bit of a problem there with, and that's again a typical challenge around the world for optimizing the grid. The incentives that the grid operators have are not set up for them to optimize, and there are good reasons for that. I mean, I used to work in transmission. I know, like there's in academia and everywhere, there's a number, like if you don't deliver electricity, if you have a blackout, then the cost to society is
Of
somewhere
course.
between 10,000, 50,000 per megawatt hour.
You saw that in Spain last year. Absolutely.
The price of delivering is 50. So you better overbuild and make sure that you are always delivering. So that's why the incentives are that way. But now it's not as helpful in this instant right now, where we need to optimize the grid quickly.
You said you were in two countries. One is, you said Estonia. Can you mention the other one, or is it commercially
Estonia and
sensitive?
Finland.
Finland.
Estonia
Okay,
and Finland.
right.
I'm not
So-
mentioning the ones where we're not yet able to mention.
Okay, yeah. What do you hope you can do? Well, I mean, you've said it kind of nicely there. So you saying you could help, grid operators buy some time, which is important. But what will it do for consumers? What can your technology do for me as a business?
So in Texas, we looked at the cost of congestion in Texas is somewhere around $2 billion a year, which if you translate down to households, it's something around, I think it's about $100 per household per year that the savings would be.
That's significant. That's significant.
So it's a direct cost that we help reduce, and so that's the first impact, reducing the cost of electricity, and so that's the impact. But also in Texas, it's a similar issue as in the UK, that they have a lot of wind in the west, consumption in this case is in the east, central Texas. So it also helps bring more clean power to the grid.
What do you want to do with GridRaven? What are you hoping to do apart from scaling it? Do you see that you could get more data? Could you make the lines, the physics of the lines easier for people to say, right, actually, I can work out more capacity? What's the ultimate goal?
Our vision is to boost the global grid by 30% by 2030. So that's every line in the world. Well, if we get half of that, we're very happy. And turns out that a team of 16 is enough to do so. So it's this AI and machine learning stuff is really mind-boggling. We're able to predict the wind to such a high degree of certainty.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the one thing you need in order to unlock all of that additional capacity. And we've built that, we've solved that already. So now it's just scaling up the software.
Is it just the wind then? Because, you've just had that big storm where you are and power lines came down and we started talking and I thought, oh, that's because, the snow gets on the power lines and the electricity can't get through it. But you said it's not that. It's actually the trees and other things falling on the power lines. So they can still operate.
On the specific question of the maximum capacity and the cooling of the wires, wind has the biggest effect. Of course, rain has an even bigger effect, but rain is typically like limited in time, also not covering the entire line. You might have 100 miles of a line. Yeah. So wind is the biggest operating factor. Of course, if it's a winter day versus summer day, you get something like a third more capacity from the difference in temperature as well. Because if it's colder, the conductor is cooled more. But you can forecast temperature relatively accurately already. So some grid operators already account for hour by hour different temperatures. In the US, in America, that's been now mandated. So grid operators have to account with temperature variations throughout the day to get that additional capacity out. But wind is a thing that hasn't been possible to forecast accurately enough.
Before we end, so mature grids we've talked about, but what about in developing nations? Look at Africa, you look at Southeast Asia, parts of that, where electrification is happening, sometimes brand new, obviously, and they'll build that. But is it because the wind is the factor here? Your tech can work, whether it's in a desert or whether it's, in the icy north. The one thing that's common is the wind, I suppose.
Yeah, we have trials ongoing in India, for example, and the challenges and opportunities are the same. India's building very, very quickly building up solar
Huge,
power, and there are constraints in bringing that power from one state to the other inside India. So there is a massive challenge, and taking actual conditions of the grid into account can help, again, just like it is in Texas or the UK. And we're trialing it in India, and I hope those will be public soon, so we can actually talk about it and get those data out. That's good. I can say we're doing it. I can't say with whom yet.
That's fine. What's driving you to do this? You seem very dedicated to it. For a man so young as well.
Yeah. So I've been working now in the power sector for 12 years, and. It's been, I think my biggest driver is curiosity. Like, can we actually do this? I mean, that's the main thing. And it looks like we can. We are already doing it. But can we now scale it globally? Can we figure out the incentive issue? Like my main question now is how to position the solution of basically optimizing the grid to transmission companies that are not set up to do it. Like, can I find a way to do it?
And that's what will move the needle, not just the places that have got good money to build new grids, but the places that are struggling. Because you can get more for the people who already have aging infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely.
If we go back to your country at the end, you said that it's being trialed out in Estonia. I'm assuming most of that infrastructure is pretty old, and I'm assuming most of it is probably Soviet. So is it working even with, you know what I'm saying, but maybe they don't have as much money to go and build brand new lines all the time. Will it give more life to aging assets?
In a sense, yes, because quite often assets are rebuilt because somebody wants to connect to the grid. So in Estonia, if you want to connect it to the grid to produce power to consume it, the grid operator will give you like a menu list of items. Like, you need to update this substation, that's going to cost you 10 million. You need to upgrade this line, and you have to pay for that. If you see that menu, you might say, I'll do this and that, but not this. Yeah. And that means you have to connect then in a way which is called a flexible connection, that you can connect to the grid, but you're not guaranteed power, because when that item that you didn't pay for is going to overheat, then you're going to be reduced. You have to reduce your production. So that sort of like flexible connection agreement is possible now. And if you accept that in order to connect quicker or at a lower cost, then you might extend the life of the asset. So it's not directly one-to-one, but there is a link there. And we've seen that. We have a project in Canada that's investigating this. A large industrial facility wants to connect to the grids. The transmission line has overheating danger in summer. Turns out that with the wind cooling effect, they can connect. Like
Wow.
if you account for it, then like 98% of the time
in
the
a way,
line can handle it.
Yeah, what you've done here is you've opened up a knowledge gap, really, haven't you? Because you're saying actually by having this ability to predict the wind, you really. Yeah, I'm just looking at, and finally, I can see from where we are in our studio, I can see a power line out the window. It's so interesting to think about, just simple as that, spotting it. So I think it's very clever. Well done. You're a very smart man, clearly.
Well, I have a smart team. I can't say that myself. Our team is very smart. Thank you so much.
They're all AI.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, listen, George, best of luck with Grid Raven. I think it's a brilliant story of someone coming across something and helping us to, it's always about loads of money, and it's sometimes very smart to see things that can be done without so much money and unlocking lots of capacity. So I wish you the very best with it.
Thank you so much, Sumit. It was a pleasure to be here.
My pleasure as well. Thank you so much. Ladies and gents, thanks for watching and listening to the podcast. My thanks to Rob for production. Get in touch, nethero@futurenetzero.com. See you in the next episode.
You've just heard the Net Hero podcast from futurenetzero.com. Join us as we help you find ways to cut your carbon footprint as we head towards net zero. Subscribe and follow us on social media. futurenetzero.com. Better business, better planet.